Is Israel legalizing apartheid? MPs pass a new law declaring Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people. Israeli Palestinians denounce what the Prime Minister calls an historic moment for Zionism as dangerous and racist. What does the future hold for them, and what will be the regional reaction? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. The controversial Jewish nation-state bill has been in the making for years, facing strong opposition all the way. Despite excluding 20% of the population, that's almost 2 million Israeli Palestinians and other minorities, the bill was narrowly passed into law. The new basic law defines Israel as the nation-state of the Jewish people, giving them the sole right to self-determination. The law promotes and encourages Jewish settlement as a national interest, despite settlements in the occupied Palestinian territories being illegal under international law. And Arabic is downgraded from being an official language. Hebrew is now the only one. The law also reiterates Jerusalem whole and united as Israel's capital. Stefanie Decker has more from West Jerusalem.
It's official. Israel is a state exclusively for Jews. That's the essence of the controversial nation-state bill passed by the Knesset on Thursday. After hours of heated debate, the measure became law by a vote of 62 to 55, with 2 abstentions. For years, the language of the bill divided political opinion between the ruling parties and the opposition. Arab members of the Knesset say the law legalizes discrimination.
This is a bill from a government that is an enemy to Palestinians. It's the most dangerous measure. It's a law from a racist government against Palestinian rights, and it creates an apartheid regime. It turns Israel into a fascist state.
The most controversial clause in the bill, a provision calling for Jewish-only communities, was replaced at the last minute. The original legislation would have allowed the state to establish separate communities on the basis of religion and nationality. The replacement provision says, the state sees developing Jewish settlement as a national interest and will take steps to encourage, advance and implement this interest. Illegal settlements for Jews are already being built, in breach of international law and UN demands. Another controversy is the status of the Arabic language. The new law says Hebrew will be Israel's only official language, demoting Arabic from second. The Deputy Attorney General says the law also allows the construction of synagogues and ritual baths, but not mosques. The Israeli president says the legislation could harm Jewish people and Israel's enemies could use it as a weapon. Protesters against the law marched through Tel Aviv on Saturday.
Thousands of Israelis came today to protest against the nation-state law, which is a racist and fascist law that is trying to turn Israel from a democracy into something else. Therefore, we are here to block this drift towards dictatorship and fascism.
I came today to say that the Arab citizens of Israel are not inferior. The nation-state law will discriminate against them, as the Israeli government has been doing for many years. Arabic is an official language, and they deserve equal rights.
The government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, insists that it's important to establish that Israel is the historical homeland of the Jewish people who have the sole right to national self-determination. Palestinians say they see the move as legitimizing apartheid, turning what is already an active policy of discrimination against them into law. Stefanie Decker, Al Jazeera, West Jerusalem.
Let's bring in our guests from Tel Aviv. By Skype, Emmanuel Navon, lecturer in international relations at the Tel Aviv University. From Gaza is Mukhaimer Abu Saada, professor of political science at Azhar University. And from West Jerusalem is Jill Hoffman, chief political correspondent at the Jerusalem Post. Thank you all for joining us. Emmanuel, the law defines the country as an exclusively Jewish state. Netanyahu says this is a defiant moment. The Palestinians say this is apartheid regime and racism. How do you respond to this?
First of all, the law does not define Israel as an exclusively Jewish state, as you mistakenly said. The law simply translates into law the fact that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. 85% of the world's countries are nation states, including 27 out of the 28 members of the European Union. And what the law does is simply translate this into legal terms, because unfortunately, Israel still does not have a written constitution. It only has basic laws. It has basic laws on the separation of powers. It has basic laws on the protection of rights of individuals and minorities, but it doesn't have a basic law on the identity of the country, which most European countries do have. So Israel just completed its incomplete
Yes, but you're talking
constitutional system.
Emmanuel, with all due respect, you're talking about two totally different contexts here. I know that you've been referring to the European Union, but the EU is something, the Palestinian-Israeli context is something which is quite different. Mukhaimer Abu Saada, you've heard what Emmanuel Navon has been saying, basically, which is this is not discrimination. This is a legitimate Israeli right to do so.
Well, let me start by saying we, the Palestinians, do not really have a problem, whatever Israel would like to call itself, whether they want to call it the nation state of the Jewish people or whatever they want it. But as long as that infringes on the original rights of the Palestinian people, who are the original inhabitant of this land, that's why the Palestinians are calling this bill as a racial and a racist legalization by the state of Israel. And I could say this for a number of reasons. First of all, this new bill does not recognize the right of the Arab Palestinians in the state of Israel, which constitute about 20% of the population of Israel. Second, this bill refers to the Arab Palestinians as non-Jews. It even does not even recognize them as a minority in the state of Israel. It refers to them as non-Jews. And third, this bill speaks about the right of any Jew anywhere in the world to have the right to come back to the state of Israel, live in the state of Israel without giving the right of the Palestinian refugees even to come back to their own land. A number of other violations of Palestinian rights. I can go further.
We'll come back to those things later.
Later on we could do that.
Sure. Okay. Jill, I mean, you've seen the concerns voiced by the Palestinians. Basically, they're saying that the new basic law does not mention the right of equality to the Palestinians. Their language has been downgraded, and they're facing more uncertainty here about their future.
Well, first of all, there are 18 Arabs in the Israeli parliament right now, and there are probably going to be just as many in the next parliament. This bill doesn't change that. Their language has not been downgraded. It hasn't affected the language at all. In fact, I have the bill in front of me right now, and it says that the Arab language is going to be protected. Regarding equality, that already
I'm sorry.
And didn't have to be in this bill.
It is saying that their language is going to be protected, but referring to their language as a special status language instead of an official language. There is a double speak here.
Right. And Israel will continue to have Hebrew as the official language of Israel, as it's been for 70 years. And now Arabic received this special status officially. None of this was codified before. Basically, Israel had 12 basic laws before that talked about Israel as a democratic state. This is the first basic law that will explain what it means to be a Jewish state. And there can be a Jewish state. If there are 57 Muslim states, 22 Arab states, there's nothing wrong with there being one Jewish state. And now we're trying to figure out what it is.
Emmanuel, usually basic laws or constitutions are there for inclusiveness, not for segregation. And this is, I think, one of the ideas that people are here talking about, is that this basic law does not show any clear indication that is there to reach out to the minorities in Israel.
Again, you have to understand, you spoke about constitution and basic law. Israel does not have.
We know that Israel does not have a constitution. It is having a basic law which ultimately will become enshrined as a constitution in the near future.
But that's what I'm trying to explain to you. We have a series of basic laws. This one is one of them. We also have a basic law that is called Human Dignity and Freedom that talks about the rights of minorities. We have that law already. We have different basic law, but until today, we never had a basic law that spoke about the identity of the state, as which is always part of a constitution. Gil Hoffman just mentioned the language, for example. The French Constitution, in its second article, says that French is the official language of the Republic. And Article 25 of the French Constitution recognized local dialects as part of the French national heritage, but they're not official languages. So this law has a specific purpose, but it is added to other basic laws, some of which talk and protect the rights of minorities, including the Arab minority of Israel, whose language is recognized and protected, who are equal citizens, who sit in the parliament and in the Supreme Court.
Mukhaimer, why do you think the law has come into effect now? What does Netanyahu gain from this at this particular moment?
Well, I think this is, first of all, a very good question. I believe that Netanyahu is trying to make use of the existence of a U.S. administration led by President Donald Trump, who is very much in support of Israel and ignoring the right of the Palestinian people. And I believe also Israel is also trying to make use of the collapse of the so-called Arab regional system as a result of the internal chaos in a number of Arab countries like Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, and so forth. And it also, Israel is also trying to make use of the internal divide among the Palestinian people and the failure of the Palestinian main factions, Fatah and Hamas, to put an end to their internal divide and come up with an initiative that will unify the Palestinian people. I believe that Netanyahu is also trying to avoid the internal problems. We all know that Netanyahu and the right-wing coalition in Israel are accused of corruption charges, especially against the Prime Minister Netanyahu and his wife. And I think Netanyahu is trying to escape those corruption charges by portraying himself as a new king of Israel, by trying to pass this law, which is, as we spoke earlier, does not even mention anything about the Palestinian or the Palestinian right of statehood. Let me just add one thing that I should have mentioned in the beginning, that, as I mentioned, the Palestinians do not really care what Israel is trying to call itself, but this should come as a final settlement between the Palestinian and Israelis.
Okay,
so as long as Israel does not recognize the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and statehood, the Palestinian will always object to calling Israel itself as the nation state of the Jewish people.
Jill, was Trump a key factor here in the implementation of this new law, given the fact that he has moved the embassy to Jerusalem, and number two, he's been saying that he's there for the ultimate deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians that could happen anytime soon?
There was a report to that effect on Israel Radio yesterday, that the reason why Netanyahu decided to move this bill forward is exactly as the professor from Gaza says, because of Donald Trump, that there were attempts to move a very similar bill forward during the Obama administration, and Obama blocked it from happening. Obama threatened Israel if it moved that bill forward. I personally checked with several ministers and politicians that are close to Netanyahu last night when they were sitting there voting and had nothing better to do than answer text messages from reporters at 1 o'clock in the morning, and none of them could confirm it. So I actually don't know if it's true, even after checking with 6 or 7 people very close to the Prime Minister. It's also internal Israeli politics.
Okay.
Not everything is global.
Sure.
Netanyahu has a reputation among some Israelis as not being someone who gets things done. This is something he can point to and show that he's not all talk.
Emmanuel, basic laws or constitutions are usually an expression of a consensus within a nation. You have the left, the right, the center coming together and crafting the shape of the future of a country in a constitution. In Israel, it's a different case. We have a right-wing governing coalition that pushes for a law But what about the other voices within Israel?
Well, let me explain to you that in a democracy, laws are passed by a majority. That's very simple. It's true in Israel. It's true everywhere else. And there was a majority in the Knesset to pass that law, and therefore it was passed. I mean, this is how democracies work. You have a majority in parliament, you can pass a law. If it's a regular law, it can be overrun by the Supreme Court in many countries, which is often the case in Israel. But like in every country in the world, laws are passed by a majority, and this is what happened last night.
Mukhaimer, what would be next for the Palestinians?
Well, first of all, let me just respond to what Emmanuel just mentioned, that Israel is a democracy, and usually in democracies, laws and bills are passed by the majority. But let me remind him that when the majority is in contradiction with international law and it's in contradiction with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that doesn't mean that a majority can pass laws which are in discrimination of the minority of its own people. Now, going back to your question, what's next for the Palestinians? Let me put it to you this way. The Palestinian people for the past 70 years have been under Israeli occupation, have been under Israeli persecution, and the continuation of Palestinian struggle against this Israeli occupation and this Israeli siege against the Gaza Strip will continue. The Palestinian people have no other choice but to continue their struggle, to continue their fight against Israel until Israel put an end to its occupation, put an end to its aggression against the Palestinian people, and allow the Palestinians to live in peace and dignity as much as the other nations of the international community.
Jill, what is it going to leave the Israeli-Palestinian conflict now after this new law?
This law won't affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict at all whatsoever. What's going to affect the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is that very soon Donald Trump's administration is going to reveal a peace plan, and Israel has already said it would come to the table and talk about it. If the Palestinian leadership will decide to come to the table and talk about it, it can help the Palestinian people. I hope they decide to come and not sit and wait for there to be a different government in America.
Emmanuel, you've been talking about Israel as a genuine democracy. What baffles me here is two things. First of all, when the law talks about Jerusalem as a whole and the united capital of Israel, you know that this is something that Israelis cannot decide. This is up there for negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Two, you seem to forget that there is a conflict which has been going on for quite some time between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and sometimes you won't be able to set into stone laws until you tackle some of those issues with the people with whom you have some problems.
Why not? I mean, Israel can, as your guest from Gaza said, define itself the way it wants.
Mukhaimer.
Well, let me start by saying that this new basic law in Israel has created a lot of, not just discussion, a lot of division even within the state of Israel. Let me just remind your participants that this new law was just passed with only 62 seats in the Israeli Knesset, which is made of 120 seats, which is a very slim majority, speaking of democracy and majority rule. And second, this new law or basic law is definitely in contradiction with international law. It's in contradiction with the Oslo Peace Agreement. And let me just remind your guests and your viewers that the clause with regard to the Jerusalem as the eternal and undivided capital of the State of Israel is in contradiction with the partition plan of 1947, which basically classified Jerusalem under international auspices, and also it is in contradiction with many United Nations Security Council resolutions, starting from Resolution 242 in 1967 and ending with the Resolution 2334, which was passed in December of 2016. All of these UN Security Council resolutions classify Jerusalem as an occupied territory, and Israel has no right to declare that all of Jerusalem is the eternal and undivided capital of Israel.
Jill, don't you think that by pushing this new law, the Israeli government puts President Mahmoud Abbas in such an uncomfortable situation where he might not be willing to move forward in any political talks in the near future?
Look, Abbas is under pressure from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates to be coming to the negotiating table. All those countries have been working closely with Jared Kushner on the plan and telling them you're not going to get what you received from Ehud Olmert 10 years ago when he was the Prime Minister of Israel and offered Abbas 100% of the West Bank with land swaps. That's not going to happen anymore. And it really would serve Abbas to come to the table. He, 10 years from now, whatever Palestinian leader there'll be won't get what he would get right now, and he's not well. It could very well be that there'll be chaos after he dies. He's 83 and has been chain smoking for 65 years. I hope for the good of the Palestinian people that he will come to the table and talk to Israel.
Emmanuel, do you think the chances for a peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians are there?
It has nothing to do with Israel's internal domestic legislation. I mean, the question of peace and war, the question of negotiations, this is a separate question. We're talking about Israeli legislation. The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has been going on for over a century. There are many reasons for it. There have been many failed attempts to resolve it, but that's a completely different question.
No, these are not.
That's
the way you read into things, which I do respect. But these are not totally separate things. You know that there are contentious issues here, particularly the issue of the Jerusalem, the right of the return for the Palestinian refugees, and this is not something that one can decide on his own. This explains why we're asking these questions.
Israel is a sovereign country, and a sovereign country has a right to legislation. This legislation, contrary to what has been said during this program, is perfectly suitable to international law. It does not contradict international law at all to define yourself as a nation state. Otherwise, 27 members of the European Union are illegally calling themselves nation states. So this statement is ridiculous. Israel has the right to define itself as a nation state. This is perfectly compatible with international law and has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Okay, I see your point. Mukhaimer, in less than 30 seconds, who can, from the Palestinians in the near future, come to the negotiating table, negotiate a settlement, knowing that Jerusalem won't be part, East Jerusalem in particular, won't be part of the Palestinian state?
Well, let me say that the Palestinians over the past quarter of a century have made big concessions with regard to making peace with Israel. Let me just remind your guests and viewers that the PLO accepted the two-state solution in the PNC of the PLO in 1988, and when the Oslo Agreement was signed in 1993 between the PLO and Israel, the late president of the Palestinian, Yasser Arafat, recognized the right of Israel to live in peace and security. And it's Israel who is not willing to make the enough concessions to move forward toward a final settlement with the Palestinians.
We're running out of time. Mukhaimer, Abu Saada, Emmanuel, Navon. Jill Hoffman, thank you very much indeed for your time and for your contribution to the program. Looking forward to talking to you in the near future. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the whole team here. Bye for now.